Follow that dream.
Follow your dream.
With all your might, you're a beacon.
You're a beacon.
So let your light shine
Let your light shine bright.
Let that dream guide you to your destiny. Be the best of what you were meant to be.
To see Jamaica move in a new direction.
Good politicians
that represent our intentions.
Good education, less kids in detention.
Where we run things, did I forget to mention?
Dream fi pass couple and CXC. My dream fi have the doctorate and every degree. On the race, negative mentality. I see everybody proud of me. So we a tell them, you have a dream, me have one too. So make we number one, we drink and do. Make that for me and you. I mean say where we a go do. We a go talk about we dream, act about we dream. No skylark with the dream. Know that dream of the Republic dream. And we Republic are gonna grow that dream.
My dream is to live in peace. One sleep and never run and off if your teeth. Tired of the indiscipline that a cause the community nothing but grief.
I say my dream for child abuses. One stop it trafficking local and overseas. Hey, let me tell you about the dreams of dreams. I feel live in a place when you don't need police. You have a dream, me have one too. So make we down one we drink and do. To make life better for me and you. I mean say what we are gonna do. We are gonna talk about we dream, act about we dream. No skylark with the dream. Know that dream of the Republic dream. And we Republic are gonna grow that dream. My dream is a Jamaican head. No Queen as head, no royal head.
We want, you know what I mean? You see?
To be united and to be uplifting as a nation could be. Jamaica, say that I feel we country. All positivity, we have to force it.
My dream for our republic is that we live as one, where instead of a few making decisions, we have more inclusion, where every man respects woman and woman respects man. I just want love where I deal with no discrimination.
We a go walk with the dream, talk with the dream. No skylark with the dream, know that dream, show that dream. We a go plant and grow that dream. We a go plant and grow that dream.
Welcome to the third in our series, our Jamaican Republic. Today we're going to talk about constitutional reform. How will it affect the quality of our life? Now, this is the third in the series. Our first time we did this, we talked about who run things. And the second forum we focused on strengthening the voice of the people after 60 years. The organizers of our Jamaican Republic series is the Institute of Law and Economics, the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, and Jeanette Calder would normally start this series, but she's unable to today, but she's with us in spirit and online. The National Integrity Action, Trevor Monroe has been very much a part of this and has been supporting our efforts. And of course, the Advocates Network, a network of individuals and organizations who are really pushing for better governance in Jamaica and for human rights. Now, today we're going to look at this question of constitutional reform. And, you know, the basic question a lot of Jamaicans have is really, what is this constitution all about? I want to just encourage you to think about it in two ways. And I want to say that everybody who's listening to this ought to just Google the Jamaican Constitution, 1962, and have a look, just have a scan, okay? You'll see that there are two main things that the Constitution covers. Fundamental rights and freedoms, such as Chapter 3, but it also talks about the history of government. And it includes how we relate to the government. And so the question is, as we move towards constitutional reform, we've heard that our government has made it very clear that we're going to undertake comprehensive constitutional reform, not just constitutional reform, but comprehensive one. And these issues will affect us directly in terms of our rights and in terms of just the operations of government. So we want to ask that question, how, just exactly how? That's our focus today. And in fact, when you registered for this forum, we asked you some of those questions. And so we're going to put on the screen in a little while the results, just to give you an idea who is in the room and your own views about the Constitution, what you know about the reform in terms of, are you aware of it, as well as the Republic, because we're linking these conversations to our discussion about the Republic, and the constitutional reform will be part of that. And so we want to hear from, we want to see in a while just what your responses are. Our moderator today is Nadine Spence, and she's the Student Services and Development Manager at UWI, and she's also host at CVN. I'm sure most of you would be familiar with Nadine as she anchors that program on CVN. So we're just going to have a quick look at the results, and we will see as soon as it's up, just what your responses have been. All right, so it's on the screen now. I hope you can all see it. And what it tells us is that most of you are very much aware that there is constitutional reform afoot. That's a good thing, because it suggests that you've been staying in touch with what's happening and you're aware that our government has promised that constitutional reform will be on the table. And the next question we asked had to do with whether you saw the constitutional reform impacting you. And so that was another question. Let's see what your responses are there. All right, so the next one, what we asked here is, do you think that the proposed constitutional reform, now the devil always is in the detail, what exactly will take place? We're going to get into some of what could be part of the reform agenda. And we're asking, will it improve your life? Now, 70% of you, perhaps those who, most of you are aware of it, maybe think it's affect your life, but it's important that 30% of you here today are of the view that it perhaps will not. So that's interesting. Let's move on. And we asked the other question about the Republic. And again, the question there is, are you aware of the government's promise to move to a Republic? And I think most of you would be familiar with our Prime Minister's famous statement, we are moving on. And the assumption, of course, is that it means we're moving towards a Republic. Now, here, more persons are aware. 92% are aware that the government is moving us in this direction. 8% are not aware. So you're aware tonight, as of now, that the government has made this commitment. Now, exactly when this will happen and the modalities, we're still waiting, but that's what we have. And the other question we asked is, do you think this Republic will impact your life directly? And of course, these ideas are linked, because we are going to have constitutional change, at least to move the Queen as head of state. And we're proposing that there's another set of changes that would link to this idea that we're moving to a Republic that would make people sovereign. So the idea that a Republic is a government without a Queen as head of state and where the people are sovereign, these are the two concepts that we're working with as we talk about the Republic. It's not just moving the Queen as head of state, but also the idea that the people run things, right? The Jamaican people are sovereign. And here we see that 64% of you feel that it will improve the quality of life. So it's against this background of some of us who are not sure. 36% here don't see the link to our day-to-day life that we want to have this conversation. And I'm going to now invite our moderator, Nadine Spencer, to join. And Nadine will take over. She'll introduce our panelists. And we thought this time we just asked Jamaicans who were willing to come and talk with us and engage this conversation about whether they see this constitutional discussion as potentially going to impact their lives, and that's the conversation we'll have. So over to you, Nadine. Are you there?
I am here and I'm looking at you. I'm still driving, so I'm going to ask
Wonderful.
everyone to bear with me. I had hoped that by now I would have gotten to where I wanted to go to have this discussion, but I'm still en route, but I'm still able to engage. And I think Professor Hamilton, Miss Calder, Jeanette, Rosalia, Professor Monroe, I said Professor Monroe, you know, Professor Monroe taught me, taught everybody in Jamaica who went to UA, I think.
Quite so.
But this series of conversations that you've been having are very, very important and are critical to this next phase of our journey towards true emancipation. And I'm happy that we are having it, and I hope that pretty soon, you know, across Jamaica, these are conversations that Jamaicans will be having, that people will be talking about this discussion about the nature of ourselves as a nation, and we'll be delving into this idea of the sovereign self. And so I know we have our speakers online, and I'm going to just ask them to introduce themselves. I think they're more than capable of telling us who they are. And so I'm going to just ask them to go right ahead and introduce themselves.
Sure, no problem, Nadine. I'm Dwayne Gutsmeer, CEO for the Institute of Law and Economics. And then also we have online Michelle. Michelle can tell us a little bit about herself, but two others who are supposed to be with us, Shauna and Wilston, they are stuck in traffic and having problems joining on the phone. So you might just be stuck with Michelle and myself at this point. So Michelle, I turn over to you.
Hi, how are you doing? Good evening, everybody. I am Michelle Hall Dyer. I am a behavioral psychologist and working with youth mostly, co-founder for the MRI Learning Center in Irishtown, and work along with the police in the community, because the Learning Center is situated on the grounds of the police station as well. So we work close in contact with that. And as I shared before, that I am aware that this reform has been talked about for a period of time, but to the extent I am now just becoming aware. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. So I guess if a good place for me to begin this discussion is this idea that Professor Hamilton introduced about the people as sovereign, and if people know how that becomes relevant to their day-to-day lives. And so I want to ask, starting with you, Mr. Gutsmeer, how you interpret that, how you interpret this idea that the people are sovereign, and if it is that we were not sovereign before, if this is the event that is going to cast us in that space of being sovereign people. So I'm asking you, just think through with me and for our audience, the idea of the sovereign Jamaican or sovereign citizens. You first, Mr.
No problem, and no pressure either. I think this is a space for learning, and certainly I think what this constitutional reform, or just things around the constitution, and even discussions like what we're having here, is to bring it back center and bring it back to the fore, so that the average person is able to grapple with what this means. I think when we were having some of the discussions, certainly Michelle and I, one of the things we were saying is that we know it exists, we hear about it, but because we're so heavily involved in our day-to-day activities, we don't pay it any mind until something comes up and we are now having to face it frontally. So I think the issue of being a sovereign citizen and so on is not that we we aren't, or we don't consider ourselves as such, but maybe along the way, the emphasis that was placed on citizens and what it means, and just how we should make sure that the rights and the different things that's embodied in that constitution, we know of them and we can certainly articulate them. And when we see that they're being trampled upon, we can say something about it. I think a lot of us, because maybe the educational system, maybe just all that's happening, it's not reinforced enough. So we lose that essence of it. So this series of conversations and also the thrust in terms of the reform helps to put it back front and center so that the average person can grapple with just the same question you asked. What does that mean? So my initial 2 cents on that.
Okay. And I'm trying to remember.
Michelle.
Michelle.
Hi,
Could
how you doing?
yes, just this idea, Michelle. I read Rosalia's article just now. She shared with me, and I think that's such an important concept, Michelle. The idea that the people are sovereign. It's not the Queen that's sovereign. It's people, us Jamaicans. We are sovereign. What does that mean for you?
Feels like it's something that is over there and I'm over here. It doesn't feel like it connects. Like I was like Dwayne said, we were discussing it amongst ourselves, and I was telling him that there's a lot of the things that I'm hearing taking place, and I've been a part of some of the talks in the early stage. But I like this discussion too when they were doing the Vision 2030, that it was taking place in, it felt far removed from the average person. And so for me to when you say sovereignty, I'm always going to hear somebody be referring to the Queen, never to me and the regular people of this country. It never felt like that, or it doesn't seem like that to me.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a powerful statement. The sovereign is here and I'm over there, because I think invariably when we explore the idea of independent people, what independent people are engaging is this process of protecting their sovereignty, their sovereign selves, of saying, I am in charge of me, and as a people, we are in charge of ourselves as a collective. And for in just the way you said it, I want to, before we get on to what are the things we want to see in this constitution and how it's going to impact us. Dwayne, you first spoke about the fact that because our education system didn't introduce us to certain things, we are kind of existing in one space, and these conversations about who we are as a collective, as a people, as a nation, those things are taking place someplace else. What do you think led us to this point, to this kind of, I'm calling it a divorce from ourselves, that as independent, sovereign people, there was this separation of the Jamaican self from the personal, like the national self somehow became disconnected from the personal self. What do you think, Dwayne, would have led us to that point?
Yeah, I think a big part of that, in terms of what would have probably led us to that point, is the influence from other spaces, other places, and again, not that grounding to say, this is what it truly means to be Jamaican, and be reminded of that fact on an ongoing basis. We certainly don't see, unless it's Heroes Day, or unless it's something, to do with Jamaica 60 or, independence, then you hear a lot about Jamaican and what it means to be that. But outside of that, we don't necessarily have those discussions going on. I listen to School Challenge Quiz, and there's some Jamaican type questions that is asked to these young children, and they literally don't know it. And then when they ask about something else in the States or a cartoon that they watch and so on, they're able to readily answer it, and that's because it's in their face. And I think that's something that we'll have to try and make sure that the average Jamaican man, woman, boy, girl is reminded of what it means to be Jamaican, what, you know, how the kind of history and the things that our foreparents had to do in order to get us to this stage, so that we can truly appreciate what that means, and, you know, try not to lose it. Because as I mentioned in the early part here, lots of influences from all over, different places coming at us, and it's coming at us fast. And with the advent of social media, it's there. So how can we even use those tools, use those medium in order to get that message out? And we might have to, you know, I don't, maybe get with the time is probably a little bit too rough, but we might have to look at how the Jamaican man and woman in 2022 juxtapose in 1962 and then, and, you know, just try to help persons to identify with that Jamaicanness and how it has evolved over time.
Yeah, Michelle, I was just thinking as Dwayne spoke about how Jamaican we are abroad. And I know people say it a lot. We're very Jamaican, not just abroad, but there are moments in our daily life when you can see the pride and you can see the connection and you can see that Jamaican people really like to be Jamaicans. You know, why are we disconnected from the cultural Jamaican, the Jamaican who loves our athletes, the Jamaican who loves our food, and the Jamaican who is proud of, you know, at least those aspects of our history that we know about, that Jamaican, and the Jamaican who is so alienated from our politics and, you know, from the way we are when we are supposed to engage about our power relationships, or how we relate to our thought, to institutions, organizations, and documents like the Constitution that speak to authority. What perspective do you have on that? How do you understand that?
I think there was the button fall somewhere, because I can remember a time when there was real pride. I can remember that time when individuals took pride in themselves. I was talking to my son yesterday and I was telling him that I remember growing up in my community, and when there was a police or a soldier or a nurse, these people were literally revered in the community. There wasn't the disdain that you see today. So there is more pride. I am accepted as more Jamaican abroad than here. When you are somewhere and you just say wagwan or anything at all Jamaican, you, like, I've seen like literally heads turn with somebody was saying, oh, Jamaican. There's this kinship of wanting to be a part of what is going on there than here. And I think that came from a lot of the false report, I would say, of a lot of persons who went abroad before us, with the bigging up of the things over there and making what's here nothing, that disparity. And when Dwayne says you hear them answering readily things that are not of Jamaica and not knowing anything that's going on here, it continues. So we have to get back, and the Constitution is a good place to lay the foundation as to how we begin to teach it, and teach it with the pride that each person will own it as me, and not just because when you own it as you, and each person does that, is how we get that connection to build that bridge that will bridge the gap of that divide, is how I think. If that roundaway made any kind of sense.
No, it did make sense. And I ask you, Dwayne, I started there this idea about the sovereign self, because I think because we haven't made that connection between the idea of a proud people in respect of our politics and our institutions. We haven't finished that work of getting Jamaicans to understand that this is also critical to our existence as people. And so that is why people, I think, feel so disconnected from the idea of constitutional reform. And people feel as if, okay, if it's not going to impact the price of rice, or if it's not going to change the price of bread, why is this thing important? And so I go there now because we were supposed to be talking about the bread and butter issues, literally and figuratively. And I want to talk about how do we get people to understand that bread and butter is not just about physical sustenance, but there's an importance to the bread and butter issues that are also how we feel about ourselves, how we feed our minds about who we are, and the constructs that we allow to be perpetuated about who we are and how we are being, and how we challenge some of the negatives out there about us. How do we get to that as bread and butter? How do we transform those issues into bread and butter, meaning our lives depend on them? How do we get that?
Yeah, and just to jump back, I think Michelle was saying that we've certainly the ball dropped somewhere, and I don't know to what extent it might be an intentional drop, because maybe we're in this position because there are others who want us to still be dependent on others to make decisions for us. And there are some people who are comfortable with others making those decisions. And you mentioned the politics, and I think that's what we see sometimes in our politics. So we elect officials, and then it's over to them to fix the particular problem. We don't see ourselves as having a role in helping to address and fix those things, and and work on those things together. And so I think maybe that's a part of the ball that was dropped, in terms of maybe it was intentional, so that the average person don't feel truly empowered. And that work that you mentioned, finishing that work, I think more persons would have maybe had more opinions, be more vocal about things that they're seeing that don't really resonate with them. So I think that's also something that we have to grapple with, as you mentioned, that whole thing with the political spectrum that we have. So it will take a lot of work in terms of helping us to understand that to finish this work means we can't just sit back and rely on others, to do the job, for others to do the work. We also have to get involved, and there's a role for us in making these things happen. I think a lot of us have just sat back and allowed things to just happen and just go on. But more and more, these discussions and issues that come to the forelight, that brings and pulls in the average citizen, is showing us that we also have that critical role to play in finishing this work.
I wondered, Michelle, if it is enough to say that the project of Jamaican emancipation, independence, of us becoming sovereign people, part of it began 1834, 1838, truly. 1944, we moved one step closer. 1962, we took another step, and we've waited 60 years for the next step, and we are craving it. Is that enough, or do we also need to sit down and map out and draw lines to show people that the price of rice might drop, the price of flour might drop? Do we need to do the second part? Are we at that point where that is where we have reached in Jamaica, where we have to demonstrate to people that it's going to tangibly impact how food is put on the table. Are we there? Is that where we are in your mind?
Definitely that's where we are. Definitely that's where we are in just about everything, because everybody wants to is asking how does this benefit me in my everyday living? Because they like I said before, they're far removed from it in just about anything. Dwayne can attest to the fact that we're going around now talking to people about getting a second income to be able to manage, and persons are asking me, oh, say what are you going to do? What are you going to give me to teach me how to make a second income? You know, so and we are trying to explain to them that this is an investment you're making in yourself. We're beginning the talks with you and to open up the ideas to you for you to do this thing. And they're saying exactly that. How does it affect me buying bread now, basically? And so that's where we are. And if we don't approach it from that, again, it's going to be something that is over there. And even if this takes place in any near future, it will be still person sitting back and feeling like I wasn't a part of this, so it really doesn't affect me. So let it go on. I would want to see a process where people understand.
You're both able to speak now. Shauna, first, you were here and you were reaching out to you. Could you just tell us about yourself so we know you, we can connect with you and talk to you?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Shauna Todd. I'm from the Institute of Law and Economics. Just listening in right now to hear where I can jump in and just voice how I feel about this whole talk about Republic and the government and the steps they're taking and our history. So thank you for having me. I'm just listening in at this point.
Okay. Mr. Da Costa is there. Could you tell us about yourself and if there's any initial thoughts you have on what you've heard so far?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes. For the part that I catch, what jump out at me is what Dwayne says. I share his concern, the same concern, that we have to find ways and means to get the information out. And Pro was talking about the pride. I think what we need to do is find ways and means to get back the nation with that first time thing, as what you said. I think the manners and the respect, all of those have lost because nobody respect nobody nowadays. Now nobody care about nobody nowadays. We need to find ways and means that they change their attitude towards some of the things what Nadine mentioned. So what can we do? What can we do as a nation to bring back things? For things to come back to what it used to be, they have to change their attitude. How that is going to be happen, I don't know, because this nation is in their way. You can't bring them back to the old time settings. So those are some of the things that jump out at me since I come in.
Yeah, thank you very much to both you and Shauna. I wanted to also ask about how we, you know, the issue that Professor Hamilton spoke about at the top in terms of the idea that these changes that are likely to take place to our constitution is not just limited, important as that is not just limited to us becoming a republic, that there are other changes that can take place. So I want to ask, starting with you, and that they have implications for our governance and for our lives, our daily lives. They have huge implications for how we navigate our lives on a daily basis, because we have to remember as Jamaicans, I think, and you can help me with this too. We have to remember that when we form a society, we also establish government to help us to organize ourselves. So the way we are organized or disorganized can be seen as a result of the failure or success of government. So if we think of that statement, what is it that we want to have reorganized for us to feel better about ourselves in terms of how we are governed? What are the things we would like to see if we were to put together a shopping list that says, you know, I've been experienced, we are experts at who we are. We are experts at being Jamaicans. We are experts at our governance. No, we might not have sat and read how it looks in the Constitution, but there are things about it that we like and things about it that we don't like. On the grand scale, things about how our leadership lead, how our governance institutions organize themselves that we don't like. So if I were to ask each of you, what would that shopping list of transformation for government meaning opposition, government meaning Senate on both sides, government, just however you construct government, what changes would you like to see? Starting with you, Jay.
Sure, no problem. And in this case, I'll go first because I think the person who goes first have it easier. So the constitutional reform is supposed to be, in my view, something that helps to, you know, gets you more accountability, allows for more transparency, and, you know, involve the common person in the discussion some more. So for me, when you look at, and certainly you've set it up in terms of when you look at just how the political structures are, there are some glaring things that I think needs to be looked at there. So, and one of them that we've spoken about from time to time is just this whole thing of what's the job description of our members of parliament, of our politicians. If I, at my workplace, step out of line, you know, they know because there's a guideline that says this is what you're supposed to do and so on. And you can be fired. We don't have those kinds of things. So when you talk about accountability, it gets right there. Though, how are we able to hold them accountable if at first we still don't have the scope within which they are supposed to operate? So that's one of the main things that I think we want to look at. It came up already, and I think it's something that certainly Jeanette and Prof has spoken about. And also, I think our current Prime Minister had indicated that there was a move around, you know, maybe fixed dates for elections and term limits and so on. And I think if those things are there, then you might get greater accountability and transparency on some of these things that, you know, the average citizen could wrap their heads around. For instance, I mean, this whole thing of you don't know when the election is going to call, it might be called in a time that's suitable for me instead of time that's suitable for you, Nadine, because I want the upper hand in doing this. But if we know that it's fixed and it's going to be January 1st, 2023, then from the minute I get in the position, I'm going to be doing everything possible to transform the lives of the people that I'm serving, because I know that come the 1st of January, that's when, you know, this term ends, and I'm going to either be seeking a new mandate, or the party that I'm serving is going to be seeking a new mandate. So I'll have to be doing everything right throughout to make sure that at that point, you know, things are, instead of what we're seeing now, where if things are going in my favor, no, I can call it and then we think. So that's also something. And the last thing that I want to just mention, and again, it's something that we've been talking about and championing, and it links to the first point, is this whole thing of the impeachment. So a member of parliament not doing what it is that we have elected them to do, and it comes back to us as citizens being involved, not just thinking that we'll vote and done, but we kind of still have to follow up those things that you promised and you told us that we would be able to do when you were coming and seeking my vote. 100 days, 300 days, we're still not seeing any progress towards those things. You do things that steps out of line. How do we then hold you accountable to that. So for me, those are some of the initial things that I think we would want to be looking at as we move to this whole thing of constitutional reform, to be able to make sure that it links to greater levels of transparency, accountability, and those things. And we see it in the polls. The recent set of polls that's coming up is bringing up all sorts of issue as it relates to governance and government and just the people who represent us. So we certainly have to be taking a look at some of those things as we move forward.
All right, thanks, Dwayne. In terms of your, yes, who this is Mr. Gutsmore.
It's right, Green, Mr. Green, musician.
Okay.
All right. I'm listening, right? And I have to ask a question, right? I'm not a lawyer. I have no legal base, but I'm a musician, and I'm going to ask a question from that line, right? It relates to the general public. Does the public know the benefits of being a republic? Do they know the pros and the cons of being a republic? Are they aware of the right they will have in a republic as opposed to being under the queen? And so I think for me personally, being a musician, going out into the with a normal person, a normal day, all I'm hearing from them, if I meet 10 persons on the road or in the studio, they say they want to stay under the queen because life is better under the queen. Nobody, or out of that 10, maybe one or two might say, yo, I want Jamaica, because they don't, honestly, I think they don't really know. So I think what we should do also.
Yeah. What do you think? Before you tell us what is, but what do you think has led to that? What is in your wisdom?
Yeah.
Has
I think the lack of education as relates from the government standpoint, it's educating their people. You know, it's also mixed as well as persons not interested because, you know, based upon their experience and what is going on now in Jamaica with politicians and corruption. They are seen in England where if a member of the house something like even take 1 cent, is it has been put to prison or is totally banned from the house, lose his career as a politician as well as in Jamaica now. A man can, I mean, you know, already, I don't need to talk it out loud, you understand? But that is what I'm saying, is that the education is not there for persons that see other jurisdictions how they deal with politicians and government officials, you know? So they are saying that Jamaica is joking as it relates to that. So persons are really interested, I can tell you. On a normal day when I'm in the studio, same thing. People are telling me, yo, they want to stay under the queen. You know, so I think we need to do a campaign where we educate people, the populace, as it relates to that. Because we can put things in place for the government, but if the people of the country are not sold on the concept and not willing to partake, I think it's a hopeless case.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Mr. Green. Can we the question that I had asked, Michelle, are you still thinking about it? Your shopping list for the sweeping changes that had been mentioned. If you know, what do you think some of the other, apart from the change to Republic, removing the Queen as head of state, what are the other changes you think would be on your shopping list?
I would want to have the conversation as to what will it cost to move the Queen as head of state, and the reality of it, not just to have the talks, but I know it begins there, the conversations, but put table realistic conversations. Okay, we're planning to take the pole down from over there. Who will need to be, who can take it down? Who will be the ones who will benefit from top to bottom down to the, I would just want to hear the realistic conversations. Like I said, not the far removed conversation, but the realistic conversation as removing this thing. What will it mean as a whole
I would want to hear that. That is on my shopping list. I'd want to hear that. I remember one time it was said in by one of the prime ministers before now, and the next question that was tossed, but we could use that money to build some more roads that wouldn't benefit us better, and we make the Queen stay where she is. I'd want to hear those kind of conversations. That's what I would want to hear, the realistic conversation as to what will it be to remove this thing and become the independent that we're asking for.
Shauna or Mr. DaCosta available? Can you speak now? And remember, the question is, what would be on your shopping list for that wide transformation of the Jamaican Constitution? What would you like to see in it if it were transformed? If you could have a conversation with those who are making the changes, and you could say to them, fix that for me. I don't know how you're going to do it, but I want you to fix that part. What would, I have 6 things that I want you to fix. Mrs. Malahoo Fort, you and your people them can figure out how you do it, but here are the 6 things I want to see changed. What would those 6 or 5 or however much, what would they be?
What?
Shauna?
Ready?
Mr. DaCosta, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. What I only work out 2 in the 2 main things I have here. The first one, what I would have liked them to do is to set the example, lead with the truth, do what they say. And if they do that, I think that will cover most of the things and drive most of the doubt what is in Jamaican mind. And the second one is a term limit. When I can recall when the Prime Minister came in, he said he's going to work on the term limit. Up to now, I don't hear anything. That's one of the things why I said that stands out in my mind at all times. They say one thing and they do another thing. They have to lead with the example and the truth. That's the main thing. And if they do that, then we can get through the rest of things then.
I think perhaps what I could say to that is, if we look at Dwayne's formula for what leading with the truth could mean, it could mean, as Dwayne said, how do we institute constitutional changes that bring about greater accountability and transparency? And he suggested, we need an impeachment clause in the Constitution. One of the ways that we could do this is with term limits, as you had mentioned as well, Mr. DaCosta, and the other one was with fixed election dates. Though when in the context of discussing how constitutions work to help us to understand how we can hold people to the truth, is looking at those mechanisms, putting those mechanisms in place so that we hold people accountable, So I think perhaps you both are saying the same thing.
Yes, and have the stiffer penalty, the penalty and stand to it. And right. I think if most of them was bearing all those penalties, then things would be better. But they get away with too much things, Nadine.
Okay.
So that's my opinion.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Right. Understood and appreciated. Shauna, are you able to share, to speak?
Yes, I'm here now. I've been listening, and I'm what keeps coming to me, 2 things that are popping out. When our ministers use our money, and what is said and debated in Parliament, that is going to be used to be done X, Y, and Z, and we're not seeing the results of it. If there's a body, a committee, or someone that we can hold accountable to oversee the spending of our money, I would want to see that. And whatever we set out to say, okay, our money is going to be used in this area. We see it from beginning to end until it's accomplished. So that's one. Another one that is very dear to my heart are the teachers. Our teachers are leaving, not by the dozen, by the planes. They're leaving. What can we do with our education system to secure our teachers staying here, letting them be properly paid, letting them be comfortable to share knowledge and impart knowledge the way they ought to, instead of thinking of, I'm going to have to juggle my salary between my light bill, feeding my own household, and keeping my job. So those two things, I don't know how the Constitution or whoever it is in whichever power can look into those things and let us as Jamaicans feel not just okay, but feel confident, knowing that they're going to do what they say they ought to do.
You know,
That's just
Sean,
my
I hear you, and I'm thinking of 101 things when you responded to that, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I'm thinking about is that we have to find ways to get Jamaicans to understand what our constitution is and how it works. That's one. The second thing is we have to get Jamaicans to understand that it is their voice and their involvement in day-to-day governance that will make a difference in how the country is run. And then the third thing I was thinking is, so how do we get Jamaicans to understand that the way they do both those things is by ensuring that when opportunities are presented for us as citizens to say what we want in terms of our governance arrangements, in terms of our laws, in terms of our policies, that we must make use of those opportunities. Because in the grand scheme of things, we have a lot of those mechanisms. For example, this possibility, this situation exists, that our constitution will be reformed, and we are now given the opportunity to say, here's what we want. You know, so what do we do? How do we get our citizens to understand that sovereignty means I'm in charge of, we as a collective are in charge of who we are, and the people who lead us have to lead us in such a way that it accords with our concept of ourselves. And that when we vote for people at election time, we don't give them our powers. We give them permission in a kind of proxy kind of way to do some things on our behalf. You know, how do we begin to get Jamaicans to start understand that this is our place, this is us, this is our responsibility, and that we can't devolve that to anybody. It's not, we can't pass it on to anybody. I feel with this. This is us. That citizens don't exist without a state. They exist within a nation and a state. And we have responsibility for this, you know, and that we must take interest in it, and we must know what we have available to us to ensure that our voices are heard. And that if we resile from that responsibility, then somebody else will just practice our sovereignty on our behalf.
Yeah, and I think,
You know,
maybe one of the ways to answer that is to put it in simple language that the average person can understand it. And one of the ways that I've heard it is from Prof. Hamilton, and literally is, I lend you a car. Do I just lend you the car and let you just keep driving it, or am I going to check that car every now and then to find out if you're driving it and dropping it in pothole left, right, and center, and so the front end is a little bit shaky, and if it's shaky, I'm gonna have a conversation with you, because that's gonna cost me to fix back that front end. Sort of thing. So it's putting it in simple language, simple terms in which the average person can see it, feel it, and relate to it. I think the work, and certainly coming out of this conversation, we're realizing that there's lots of work to do. And people like you and I and everybody on this call can find themselves in something that they can do to push the envelope and push the discussion a little bit further. But I really do think it can start with simplifying the language, lightening it to everyday situations. Just like when Michelle and I go out and we talk to people about creating a budget, big abstract thing. But then when we start to talk about in your family, when you have to do breakfast, what does that look like? So it's now relatable to them. And I think that's kind of how we have to take this big concept of I'm in charge of Jamaica. I have a say in what happens in Jamaica, and localize it for them so that they understand and then can channel that out. So, just positing that in response to what you just asked. I see that the hands are growing.
Yes,
In
so
terms
I'm
of the
gonna
number of hands native. So for sure, discussion has been really useful.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with Howard, and I see Howard's hand up, and Mavis and Matthew and Maxine. I don't know what order those hands were raised,
That's
but
the exact order.
on my screen, I'm going to ask them to just go in that order. Howard, Mavis, Matthew, and Maxine.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, is this Mavis?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Mavis.
I said before about term limits and job description and recall and so on. Just that somewhere in this thing, we need to address land reform.
Exactly.
We need to address private property. We need to address personal responsibility. You can't have rights and not responsible for anything. I'm still also concerned that, okay, there are some things that we would want to put in the Constitution and some other things probably in a plan like 2030 or 2050. We decide where to put what. And then there's this whole question, we talk about sovereignty. And I wonder, because the question of Caribbean sovereignty is under discussion, whether we would have any reference at all to any commitment or even approach to the whole Caribbean situation. I know there are people who are studying other constitutions to try and get some ideas for us. We need some of that. And somehow we need to get into the ministry and what their process is, and to see how different groups connect so that eventually we can, pull together all the stuff that we are trying to put together. Public education, very important because people have different perspectives, definitely. So it's nice to start in small groups, but it certainly will have to be widened and be more all-encompassing as we go along. And that's about it for the time being. Thank you.
Okay. Howard?
My name is Howard McDonald. I'm a CPA by trade. But I had a few questions as it relates to the Constitution. I personally don't believe that the current government, either PNP or GLP, has the moral standing or authority to even create a republic, because they have been there for so long and they're tarnished. Basically, they're basically puppets of the colonial system. As it relates to what I think would make sense for the republic, and I believe in the sovereign man, so I agree with having a republic. There needs to be equity. We can have a constitution, but without an enforcement trigger, nothing will happen. We have to hold all politicians, even when you have a constitution, to the fire, right? We need separation of functions. We need checks and balances to ensure that these people are accountable. And someone mentioned impeachment, which would be something good too, to keep them in check, to ensure that once we have the Constitution, the corruption will go away, because Jamaica is a very corrupt place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Howard. Let me look again. We had Howard. Matthew, was Matthew next?
Yeah, man, I'm here.
Maxine. Okay, Matthew, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Good night, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for pulling this together. Been listening attentively to the discussion that's been had. I think there are a number of different entry points. I think where I'd want to focus my contribution on tonight is on something that I've heard a number of the different participants, language that I've heard a number of the different the panelists say, and we often are using this idea of we. You know, how do we get these persons to do it, or how do we get Jamaicans to feel a certain way? And it's kind of like, you know, when you hear the Americans talk about the American people, you know, your American politicians say, yes, you know, I don't believe the American people will take this a particular way. I don't think this is in the interest of the American people. And I think the first question I would posit is that, is there a we? Is there a we beyond the vibes and the good food and that sort of thing that we're all bought into? Because I think we can engage in this process of creating a reform around the Constitution and implementing certain things that I would say are technical fixes and important technical fixes, but they don't necessarily give us a sense of we. And so when persons often talk about, and I don't remember which of the panelists talked about, but this idea of like, I remember when, you know, there was a sense of pride and there was a sense of the word I'm going to go is purpose, right? When we started this thing, there was this sense that we were engaging in a journey as a people to accomplish something together. And so we can do the work of creating a constitution, but not necessarily have a shared vision for what we are trying to do together as a people. And I think unless we get that buy-in, or we have that shared vision, then I think a lot of the other things are going to be important and they will fix certain aspects of the problem, but we're still going to have the challenges of getting people to engage. So we want people to be engaged in the local government and the parties, but a lot of persons say that, why? And that's part of that is because I'm not bought into the we that you're claiming exists. The we I business about is myself and my wife, or myself and my baby mother, or myself and my kids. That's who I'm interested in working in support of. And so I think that we-ness is something I'm struggling with myself, and that idea of purpose as to what are we doing together as a people. And to the person who spoke before me, that idea around, well, who has the authority to be able to bring people together to create that sense of purpose, I think is an important one. It doesn't have to be an individual, it can be whatever, but those are things that I think are critical. And we can reform a constitution without getting those things. But I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. Over.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I just, you know, just if I can be loud, I know my time is not, you know, is up almost, but I wanted to say, you know, one of the things that troubles me, if I can share that here about Jamaica, is that we seem to view Jamaica through the lens of politicians, you know, like how we perceive the country is based on the crop of politicians who we have. And I think if we are not able to imagine a possibility of Jamaica, or imagine a future, who we are as a collective, the same thing you just spoke about, like, is there anything good left in us as a people? I know that that's not easy to understand, you know, because we're hard to take, you know, we murder us, we're angry. There are so many things about us that has me as a citizen worried, but is there anything about us that is good that we can believe in? Because invariably, you know, the idea about sovereignty, the sovereignty, those are very intangible things. Those are things that speak to belief, and those are things that make your heart well up and make you want to cry and make you want to go out, go fight war. And so the benefits of that is being a part of a community and benefiting from being a part of the community. So you're right. You know, is there a we that we can call on? Because every time I hear us talk about the we use a section of the population to define who we should be. And sometimes I know I'm guilty of it too, but sometimes I worry about us and this inability to move ourselves out of always thinking that we are the last crop of politicians. This is how we define ourselves. So we are corrupt if the politicians are corrupt. You know, so there are other groups of us, I think, that if we thought long and hard about, we could define ourselves in the context of that. You know, there are other ways that we think it's hard, but I think there are other ways that we have to define ourselves, or else we're not going to go any further than this. You know, if we don't do this now, when? And if we don't do this, who will? You know, will 20 years from now, will that generation be able to have a conversation about the Jamaican self and the sovereign Jamaican self in a positive way? I know Lawman is next. Your hand is up. And I'm not asking you to answer, but I'm just wondering, is there another way that we could conceive of ourselves?
Okay, Maxine, can I speak? I have my hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Maxine, yes.
Okay, I just want to preface what I want to say before I actually just focus in on my very specific question. I was born in the 50s, early 50s. I've been home for 7 years. My you say profession is as counselor, psychotherapist, and I'm a farmer. Okay, I farm up in the Blue Mountains. I will say, in terms of the sense of belonging, walking in the villages and talking to those who are quote unquote on the lower end of the economic strata of Jamaica, they do not feel as if they have a sense of belonging in this country. When the road gets overrun and you can't get to their farms, and I organize a group of men to come and clean the road. They say you can't clean the road because the government says if you clean the road, they will deal with you. This is the Queen's land and the government land. It don't belong to us. We are landholders. We're not landowners, okay? So I'm probably one of the most senior persons on this call right now. When I was growing up, back then, everybody was a landowner. They had a sense of belonging and ownership, and they were tied to the power of the land. They were indigenous, and they felt they're sovereign people. They didn't know that from the United Nations or the intellectual whatever. But right now, they don't feel a sense of belonging. They don't feel as if this is their country. They're just here paying taxes, and that's it. Okay, so that is very tangible and visceral for the Jamaican people. And I'm not just talking in the Blue Mountains. I've gone through many rural villages in this country, and that is the conversation on the ground, and they don't trust the government. Okay, so that is real and palpable. So the other part of what I want to say is that according to the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, there is approximately 20% of the country that is in a state of poverty. This is primarily what you would call these are the indigenous and sovereign people, the poor people of the country, right? And that would equal to about 500,000 people in the country if we took the current population at 2.5 million, right? So in studying the ILO 169 that the United Nations has, decreed, how can we speak, right, of a republic when the original indigenous and sovereign people since 1991 of this country, right? You have to go back and look at all of the treaties and so forth, right? They're classified as squatters. They're constantly called squatters and move from place. They don't have a sense of belonging, but the country is being sold out to foreign interests. And I am supposed to feel a sense of belonging in my country, but everybody else has a right to be here. And I'm indigenous and sovereign, and I don't have nowhere to live. I don't even have a quarter-acre of land to put a thatch, a bamboo hut, nothing. And everybody is selling out everything everywhere. Every first world country have more dibs. My ancestors died and gave up their blood so that I could live and survive, and everybody else owed it, and I am a squatter. So what are we talking about for a republic? Let us start with the conversation in a genuine, fundamental way. We need to give the sovereignty to people. We have it now. We don't need a republic to give us our sovereignty because it already exists. We need to stop all the selling off of the land, and we need to give the quote unquote squatters somewhere to live so they can feel a sense of belonging. And then you will see everything change because pride will come back, commitment will come back. That is the way the psyche of the human being works. If I am treated as belonging, then I will respond by behaving as one who belongs. That's what I want to share. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Maxine. Lawman?
Thank you very much. This is an awesome engagement. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to say something. Maxine, I'm moved by what you just said because, you know, first of all, republic or not, Jamaica's growth is pegged to our mindset. It is pegged to our attitudes. It hinges on being serious about accountability, right? If there's going to be any kind of constitutional reform, somebody said it earlier, there has to be wide-scale sensitization and consultation because there has to be a shared vision. Matthew used a statement that I loved. He said, you know, is there a we? You know, when we think of America and the American Constitution, it starts off by saying we the people. When you look at Jamaica's Constitution, the language is the orders or the person. You know, there's no sense of we. So I think even in moving forward, you know, considering language is extremely important so that we can all feel a part of this movement. And again, I've gone through the Constitution a couple of times, and there are certain chapters that clearly will not exist anymore if we're going to go the route of a republic. Chapter 6, chapter 4, I believe, that speaks about the Governor General totally through the window, because we won't need a representative of the Queen. But then that takes us to a chapter that talks about executive powers. With the corruption that is rampant in society, how do we ensure that accountability is at the forefront of the conversation? You get what I'm saying? So all of that, and then there are individuals talking about, if there is not a Governor General, do we now have a president? You know, so I think a lot of consultations will be needed, because for me, we won't need a president. We don't need that extra bill. We do not need somebody just there ceremonially. Maxine spoke about so many individuals in abject poverty. We squander money in that country like it's nobody's business, and nobody's being held accountable. And then there are other aspects of the Constitution that, well, other conversations that I'd want to have around, you know, any Jamaican being able to hold public office. If it is a case now that somebody with a dual citizen, a British citizen, a Canadian citizen, can still sit in Parliament, I don't see why a Jamaican contributing to you know, the development of the country, but an American as well, dual citizen, can't have the same opportunity. And doing Gutsmere mentioned term limits, excellent, love that. And another issue that I want us to, you know, consider is the idea of, you know, our members of Parliament having so much power and seem to be the one dangling the carrot when we look down on our council representatives, you know, those who are a part of local governance. And to me, it should be flipped. That is where, and Nadine, you mentioned it earlier, that sometimes we look at issues through the lens of politicians, and that's where we fall. We fall down even before we can even move. You know, so we have to take all of these things into consideration. Sabrina Barnes is on she's about 16 or 17 years old, I don't remember, vibrant. You asked Nadine, how do we envision, what do we see 20 years from now? Should the change happen now, or should we wait? Somebody like a Sabrina can answer that, but I believe that the revolution definitely has to start now. Thank you.
Okay, I think I thank you so much, Laman, and for everybody who's contributed. I think my time is up. I think I need to hand over now back to Rosalie, so that she can do the finish. She can, you know, take us through to the end. But I just want to say that I'm a post-independence Jamaican citizen, right? I applied once to teach in New York, and I didn't finish. I also applied to teach in Japan, and I didn't follow through. I had this kind of thing in me. I'm a trained teacher, that there is this way that I am needed in the Jamaican classroom that perhaps I wouldn't necessarily be needed in the American or the Japanese classroom. I think about a lot of the things that I have foregone as a Jamaican citizen. And I see most of my colleagues, most of my classmates, like my batchmates from college at Bethlehem, they've been living in the States and teaching for a good 20 years, you know, and they own a lot of things I don't. Because you know, there are many ways I could locate myself in this conversation, because what we were trying to do today is to connect us to the idea of the Constitution and who we are and the bread and butter issues. I could see how we can lose heart, but I have this thing that says, you know, I am so afraid of dying, and we would not have reached we would not have reached where we wanted to go, or where I envisioned that we could be as the Jamaicans, or some of the critical things that we needed to build to ensure that we are on our way to leaving a good legacy behind, that we would not have done that. I think Jamaica deserves for us to think it through. And I think that we are not as bad as we say we are. We really aren't. We have some things that we're not getting right, but I know that if this opportunity presents itself, and we have to sit down, and as much as we are hurt, and as much as we are disappointed, and as much as some of the people who've promised to get us through this have not lived up to their expectations, I think our expectations, I think we need to use those lessons and build out the kind of systems and laws and institutions that we want. I think this is a grand opportunity for us to think it through, you know. We want more accountability, we want more transparency. Okay, impeachment, okay, this. I think this is what this moment is, for us to move it from how hurt we are, how we feel emotionally, and to say, you know, in a constitution, what does it look like? And how do we then create the kind of society that will make us feel better, but not only that, live better and be better and do better. So I'm so happy that I got this opportunity to share, because to be honest, I was kind of seeing the conversation and kind of looking at it and wondering, should I pay attention to it? Can I give my heart to this? You know, like many of us, my heart has been broken so many times by some of the ways in which this country engages its citizens. But having been here today, I feel energized. You know, perhaps I will do something else, and hopefully the next step will get me even energized some more, so that even at this point I can get invested in this conversation. So Rosalia, thank you for the invitation. Jeanette, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to you now so you can complete the rest of the program.
Thank you so much. You've energized all of us, I think. We can't give up on Jamaica. That's why we're here. And for those of us who are overseas, you want to be here, you're here in spirit, and we know that you love Jamaica, and that's why you're here with us tonight. I want to just say this issue of accountability has permeated the discussions, and I want us to think about it in two broad ways, right? There's a role that we have as citizens to take charge. And I love our contribution. Somebody said, you know, we're already sovereign. Some of us see ourselves as already sovereign. And therefore, we're not relying simply on the government to determine our future, because we feel we must actively engage in that process, do what we can do, and importantly, hold our government accountable. And that issue came up so much, the issues whether it's through impeachment mechanisms, whether it's through the active holding them to their promises, you know, all these kinds of things. These are things that we can do. But importantly, in the representative democracy that we have, there is a role, an important role for our representatives to play. And the question we have to ask is, to what extent do the representatives who represent us in Parliament are holding accountable the executives for the decisions they make. And in fact, that's a big part of this conversation. We're going to come back to it. How do we improve representative democracy? Is the voice of our representatives, even if they wanted to speak loudly on our behalf, is it thwarted by the members of the executive in the legislature? Those are important constitutional discussions we need to have. Issues of the institutions of accountability, Integrity Commission, Auditor General, they're all there. We spend billions of dollars for them to do their work. And those reports don't end up in Parliament, in which decisions can be made, actions can be taken, such that we justify the spend that we have. So there are lots of issues, and yes, the conversation continues in the chat. We don't have enough time. The 5 ways we felt are things that all of us can do, so we don't just leave here and feel good and feel energized, but that we start with conversation among our friends and family and so on. So I don't know if Shamar or Anna Kay wants to jump in, but if not, it's on the screen, we can look at it quickly. Start with informing yourselves, very important, because if you've not read the Constitution, how are we gonna get into that discussion? That's very important. Dialogue with others, very good friends, family, people we know. Let's start there, and make sure that we can keep this conversation going. All right, that's the second. Third, let's try to do this quickly. Strengthen our voices, get involved in community organizations that exist. Some of them you may not be happy with, create your own, that's possible. The importance is coming together and strengthening our voices as we move forward. And the fourth thing that we talked about is the extent to which we actively engage your MP. Get to know your MP. We shouldn't be here. None of us on this call should not know who our MP is and hold them to account. I think it's important to say there are good MPs out there. There are MPs who really want to represent you. Work with them, find them, engage them. And JAMP, of course, has an online mechanism in which you can get in touch with your MPs easily. So if you're not familiar with JAMP, please go on the JAMP website, get to know how easily you can access your MPs just by sending information and emails to them very quickly. And then lastly, we also want to make sure that you connect with us. And these are the organizations that are behind this, our Jamaican Republic. You can contact us if you want to share additional information, please do, because we do want to hear from you. So I'm gonna ask Danielle Archer if she has just 1 or 2 points that she wants to make before we wrap up. And she was gonna do the closing and thank yous. Danielle, over to you.
You're most welcome, Prof. I think you did an excellent wrap up, and so did Nadine. Thanks, Nadine, for energizing us. I think where we are is facilitating more of these discussions so that everyone can get to understand what the Constitution is about. 2 of the things that jumped out was connecting with persons about the Constitution and developing our identity, not just our personal identity, but a national identity. And I think listening to everyone this evening, what comes out is having a greater sense of who we are as Jamaicans, and certainly intense consultations would be required. We're talking about public education. We're talking about developing who this we is, who we are. And I think this is a good place to start. This is what we're trying to do. So thanks to everyone for coming out. The ideas will continue to flow and we'll continue to have these discussions, because it's only by having these discussions that the larger discussions can be more impactful. Prof?
Great, thank you so much. And thank you all so much for coming. I know we're way over the time that we wanted to wrap up, but it was a good and informative conversation. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. One love.
Nah, ease up.
We now ease up.
Follow that truth.
Follow your dreams.
With all your might, you're a beacon. So let your light shine bright. Let that dream guide you to your destiny. Be the best of what you were meant to be.
To see Jamaica Jamaica move in a new direction.
Good politicians
that represent our intentions.
Good education, less kids in detention.
Where we run things, did I forget to mention?
Dream for pass couple and CXC. My dream for have the doctorate and every degree. On the race, negative mentality. See everybody proud of me. So we are tell them, you have a dream, me have one too. So make put on what we drink and do. To make life better for me and you. I mean say where we are go do. We are go talk about we dream, act about we dream. No skylark with the dream. Know that dream of the Republic dream. And we Republic are gonna grow that dream.
My dream is to live in peace. Want sleep on me veranda, not fi fear thief. Tired of the indiscipline that a cause the community nothing but grief.
I say my dream for child abuses. Want stop the trafficking local and overseas. Let me tell you about the dreams of dreams. I feel live in a place where no two need police. You have a dream, me have one too. So make put on what we drink and do. To make life better for me and you. I mean say what we are gonna do. We are gonna talk about we dream, act about we dream. No skylark with the dream. Know that dream of the Republic dream. And we Republic are gonna grow that dream. My dream is a Jamaican head. No Queen as head, no royal head.
We want, you know what I mean? You see?
To be united and to be uplifting as a nation could be. Jamaica, say that a few we country, all positivity, we have to force it.
My dream for our republic is that we live as one, where instead of a few making decisions, we have more inclusion, where every man respects woman and woman respects man. I just want love where I deal with no discrimination.
We are go walk with the dream, talk with the dream. No skylark with the dream, know that dream, show that dream. We are go plant and